The year was 1946 when a young woman with porcelain skin and eyes full of desperate hope stepped off a bus into the neon-soaked streets of Los Angeles. Elizabeth Short, just 22 years old, was one of many flocking to the California coast with dreams of seeing her name in lights. She was striking, possessing a beauty that seemed suited for the silver screen, yet she found herself wandering the fringes of the industry she so longed to join. Hollywood in the late 1940s was a city of sharp contrasts where the glitz of movie premieres masked a dark undercurrent of vice and broken promises. For Elizabeth, life was a relentless cycle of waitressing jobs and fleeting encounters, a constant struggle for survival in a sprawling city that often consumed the naive and the beautiful. Despite her hardships, she possessed a unique style that set her apart, often seen wearing elegant black suits that accentuated her pale complexion and dark, voluminous hair. It was during these wandering months that she supposedly earned the nickname that would haunt history, the Black Dahlia. Some say it was a play on a popular film of the era, a moniker bestowed upon her by the patrons of a local drugstore who were captivated by her penchant for dark clothing and the artificial flowers she often tucked into her curls. She cultivated an air of mystery, a persona suggesting a woman of hidden depth and secrets. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This carefully crafted image made her a figure of fascination before her name became a permanent fixture in the annals of American crime. When she was a ghost in the making, never realizing her fame would come at the ultimate, most tragic price. The early days of January 1947 were unusually cold. Elizabeth's movements during her final week remain a fragmented puzzle that detectives have spent decades trying to assemble. She had recently returned from San Diego with a salesman named Red Manley. On the evening of January 9th, Manley dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel, a landmark of luxury and secrets. Witnesses recalled seeing her in the lobby, a dark silhouette moving through the crowd of travelers. She made several phone calls, perhaps waiting for someone who never arrived. When she stepped out of the hotel doors and into the night air, she vanished into the thick fog of the city. For 6 days, the world lost track of Elizabeth Short. Whether she was held captive or moving willingly through the shadows remains one of the case's most enduring mysteries. The vibrant woman who walked into the Biltmore ceased to exist until the morning the sun rose over a vacant lot in Leimert Park. The morning of January 15th was overcast and quiet. Betty Bersinger was walking with her young daughter down South Norton Avenue when she spotted something pale in the weeds. She initially mistook the figure for a discarded store mannequin, broken in half and left in the grass. But as she drew closer, the horrific truth paralyzed her with fear. It was the remains of a human being. The crime scene was unlike anything the veteran LAPD officers had ever witnessed in their careers. Elizabeth's body had been severed completely at the waist with surgical precision, drained entirely of blood, and posed in a way that suggested a sick theatricality. Most haunting of all was her face. The killer had used a blade to carve deep gashes from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, creating a permanent, macabre grin known as a Glasgow smile. There was no blood on the ground, indicating she was killed elsewhere and meticulously cleaned before being dumped. The news hit Los Angeles hard. The Examiner turned this tragedy into a circus, manipulating Elizabeth's mother for headlines. Soon, a package arrived at the newspaper office containing her belongings and a taunting note, proving the killer was still watching. The gruesome discovery in Leimert Park sent shockwaves through the Los Angeles Police Department, placing detectives Finis Brown and Harry Hansen at the center of a storm. These seasoned men had never seen such calculated brutality. The investigation became an obsession, a massive manhunt that mobilized nearly every resource the city possessed. Brown and Hansen found themselves under a suffocating microscope, with every lead scrutinized by an aggressive press. The pressure to find the monster responsible was immense, yet the trail seemed to go cold as quickly as it had ignited. The detectives sifted through thousands of tips, navigating a sea of public hysteria that threatened to drown the truth. As the autopsy began, medical examiners uncovered details that shifted the investigation from a crime of passion to one of chilling expertise. The bisection was a hemicorporectomy, a complex surgical procedure performed between the lumbar vertebrae. The precision required to sever a human body so cleanly and surgically suggested the killer possessed significant medical knowledge. This revelation steered the detectives toward a specific class of suspects, doctors or surgeons. The lack of blood at the scene and the meticulous scrubbing of the corpse pointed to a killer who was clinical and perhaps had access to a private environment where such a procedure could be performed without interruption. While the police searched for a man with a scalpel, the killer began a twisted dialogue with the city, calling himself the Black Dahlia Avenger. The culprit sent a series of taunting letters to newspapers. These messages, constructed with letters clipped from magazines, displayed a blend of arrogance and playfulness. One package contained Elizabeth's birth certificate and address book, both meticulously cleaned with gasoline. The killer seemed to delight in the chaos, treating the investigation as a high-stakes game. He was a man who craved the spotlight as much as his victim once had, using the media as a megaphone for his psychological warfare against the authorities. The list of suspects grew, but a few names rose to the top. Red Manley, the last person seen with Elizabeth, was the first to be grilled. Though he was eventually cleared, his involvement left the detectives searching for more sinister connections. Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner who had hosted Elizabeth, also fell under suspicion. His complicated relationship with the aspiring actress and his ties to the underworld made him a person of interest. However, no name resonated with more darkness than Dr. George Hoddle. A brilliant but eccentric physician with a history of troubling behavior, Hoddle became a primary focus. His home, the Sowden House, a strange fortress-like structure, was rumored to be the site of drug-fueled parties. Detectives wondered if the surgical precision of the murder found its origin within those cold walls, yet the investigation was plagued by systemic corruption. The LAPD in the 1940s was often more concerned with public image than with solving a murder. Furthermore, hundreds of false confessions derailed the case, creating a chaotic environment for the investigators. Men and women alike, driven by a twisted desire for infamy or psychological trauma, flooded the department with claims of guilt. Each confession had to be investigated, draining vital time and resources away from legitimate leads. Amidst the noise, the real killer seemed to slip further into the shadows. As years turned into decades, a disturbing theory emerged. Some whispered that the reason the Black Dahlia Avenger was never caught wasn't due to a lack of evidence, but because he was being protected. There were indications that certain suspects had connections to the city's elite or high-ranking officials. Evidence that could have been conclusive seemed to vanish, and promising leads were abruptly shut down. The possibility that the killer was a man of status, someone whose exposure would bring down a house of cards, began to haunt the detectives. The search for justice was becoming a desperate fight against a ghost with friends in high places, a phantom who walked the same city streets as those sworn to find him. The case of the Black Dahlia slowly drifted from the front pages of the Los Angeles Examiner into the dusty, forgotten archives of unsolved mysteries. As the decades passed, the frantic fervor of the 1947 manhunt cooled into a chilling curiosity, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a family frozen in a perpetual state of grief. For Elizabeth Short's mother and sisters, there was no closure, only a hollow silence that stretched across years of fading newsprint. The vibrant young woman they once knew was replaced by a gruesome caricature in the public eye. Elizabeth became a ghost haunting the streets of Leimert Park, her name synonymous with a level of brutality that the City of Angels could never quite wash away. The transition from a real person to a dark urban legend was complete, and in that transformation, the woman herself was nearly lost to the myth. In the 21st century, a new generation of investigators turned toward modern forensics, hoping that science could finally succeed where detectives Finis Brown and Harry Hansen had failed. The promise of DNA testing offered a glimmer of hope, But the passage of time had not been kind to the physical evidence. Decades of storage in poor conditions and the lack of foresight regarding biological preservation made extracting a clean genetic profile nearly impossible. The items contained in the taunting packages sent by the killer had been handled by far too many hands, and the murderer's meticulous cleaning of the body with gasoline likely destroyed the microscopic signatures that could have unmasked him. The case remained a fortress of silence, stubbornly resisting the clinical light of modern technology and forensic progress. Amidst this technological stalemate, a deeply personal narrative emerged. Steve Hodel, a former LAPD detective himself, embarked on a haunting quest that bridged his professional duty and his own troubled family history. After the death of his father, Dr. George Hodel, Steve discovered a collection of private photographs that seemed to link the physician to Elizabeth Short. Driven by a desperate need for the truth, Steve spent years painstakingly reconstructing his father's movements, uncovering evidence of his medical expertise and his proximity to the crime scene. He argued that the Sowden house, with its strange architectural shadows, was a theater of the macabre where his father's dark impulses culminated in the most famous murder in history. For Steve, the investigation was an attempt to excise a generational demon, even if it meant confirming his own father was the monster. Elizabeth Short eventually became the ultimate symbol of the lost girl, a cautionary tale of the dark side of the Hollywood dream. Her story served as a grim reminder that for every name that ended up in lights, there were countless others who vanished into the neon-lit shadows. She was the starlet who never got her big break, her life reduced to a series of grainy crime scene photographs studied by morbid enthusiasts. This cultural obsession spawned movies and books that often walked a razor-thin line between genuine historical interest and cold-hearted exploitation. The Black Dahlia moniker, once a playful nickname, became a brand that stripped away her humanity in favor of a marketable, noir mystery. Yet, beneath the sensationalism and the theories of Steve Hodel, there remains the reality of a 22-year-old woman who truly loved life. Restoring Elizabeth's identity requires us to look past the bisection and the haunting Glasgow smile. She was a daughter with a striking presence and a dreamer who walked through the Biltmore Hotel with hope in her eyes. The final resolution of her story is not found in a laboratory or a courtroom, but in the collective effort to remember her for the life she lived rather than the way it was stolen. The tragedy of Elizabeth Short is the way she was consumed by the very city she hoped would make her whole. As the sun sets over the vacant lots of modern Los Angeles, the shadow of the Black Dahlia remains long. The killer likely took his secrets to the grave, escaping earthly justice. While the files in the LAPD headquarters grow yellow with age, the true story of Elizabeth's final 6 days remains buried in the shadows of history. We may never know the exact sequence of events that led to her end, but Elizabeth Short serves as a permanent sentinel, a reminder of a darkness that remains buried just beneath the silver screen's glitz.